Again, welcome to this pop-up event with Process and Faith. As I just mentioned, Process and Faith is a program of the Center for Process Studies, and my name is Sherry Kling, and I serve as Director of Process and Faith. And we are super thrilled to have our event this evening and our speakers that are joining us. 3 of the 4 editors of a new book that's just been released called Preaching the Uncontrolling Love of God. And I'm among the many people that have an essay contribution within this text. So it's just a great collection. There's a lot of really wonderful essays. And so I know you'll be hearing all about what's in it and our presenters' hopes and dreams with this book this evening. But so I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So Jeff Wells is kind of the instigator behind this project, and he is the lead pastor of the Church of the Village in New York City. And I won't get into a lot of details on background, but he's been a strong advocate for process theology and uses that in his own work. And so he was motivated to get this project off the ground, and we're so glad he did. As well, in addition to Jeff's presence with us tonight, we have Nichole Torbitzky, who is an associate professor of religion and also university chaplain at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri. And Nichole also manages our lectionary commentaries that are posted for each week's lectionary readings. There's someone in the Process community who's written a commentary, and Paul Nancaro just did a bunch of beautiful ones for the month of April, which I did use, Paul. And so those are a great resource. We can put a link to that in the chat later. And our third speaker is Vikki Randall, who lives in Monrovia, California, and she has 28 years of experience in the pulpit, of pastoral experience, serving various size churches in the Presbyterian Church. And she is now also serving as an adjunct faculty with Azusa Pacific Seminary. And so she teaches undergrad theology there. So again, our speakers may share a little bit more if they'd like about their current work. And but I'd like to just turn it over first to Jeff to get us started to learn a lot more about this idea of preaching the uncontrolling love of God.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I would say that my current work feels very overwhelmed by the work that goes into publicizing a book like this. I'm still serving as a pastor of a pretty thriving congregation, but it feels like I have 2 full-time jobs now. But it's a joy to be doing this, because it feels like this book has the potential to really have a big impact. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But I wanted to start off by just sharing the story of how this book came about. And I'm grateful that so many people are here tonight, and especially several contributors have been able to join us tonight. So it just feels good to be able to share this with the Process and Faith community. And lots of people I see online I've not seen in any of the other presentations that we've done. So good to be able to share this good news of this book with some new people. So it was back in, I've actually been kind of studying on my own process theology since about 2017. But it wasn't until 2021, in August and September of 2021, that the Church of the Village, where I serve in New York City, began intentionally teaching open relational and process ideas to the congregation. And we did that first with a worship series in which we invited John Tatamanill, who's a process and constructive theologian at Union Theological Seminary here in New York, Catherine Keller, who is at Drew, which is just an hour away from us in New Jersey, and Ignacio Castuera, and then the other preachers in the series were from our own congregation, but all of us had some training or had studied process theology on our own. And we all, the whole pastoral staff in the church, felt like this was a really important direction for us to be going. Partly because we had been saying among ourselves for a while that we felt like, we understood ourselves as a progressive Christian congregation. We're very inclusive and had a very strong social justice orientation, but we didn't have a very well worked out theological understanding of what we meant by progressive Christianity. And we came to the conclusion that process theology and open and relational theology provided that for us. And so we followed that series with another series on discipleship, because John Cobb had said to me, I'd really like to preach at your church, but I want to preach on discipleship. And so he agreed to preach 3 Sundays in a row on Zoom. And after that, I thought, well, we could take John's 3 sermons and the ones that we did in August and early September and put them together in a little booklet and share that with people, and maybe even get a few from other congregations who we knew of who were doing similar things. And then things in the church and the tail end of the pandemic and becoming a hybrid congregation with hybrid worship and all of that got in the way. And so it was put off for quite a while. And in the meantime, John recruited me to help found a new organization called the Living Earth Movement. And I served as the co-chair of that for a year. But then I went to the 50th anniversary conference of the Center for Process Studies. And I mentioned this idea of putting a little book together of mainly sermons about process and open relational theology. I mentioned this to Mary Elizabeth Moore, who immediately responded, "Don't wait. You have to do this book. We really need this book." And so that motivated me to come back to the Church of the Village and ask for a 9-week leave of absence over the summer, last summer, to begin working on putting this book together. And then one of the first people who I reached out to get recommendations for contributors to the book was Tom Oord. And when I offered my kind of initial vision for what the book might look like to Tom, he said, "Well, I would like to be a co-editor with you," which was a great surprise to me and very welcomed. And then Tom said, "And we should recruit a couple of other people to help do the editing of all the submissions." And so he reached out to Nichole and Vikki, and they agreed to join the team. And it's just been an amazing process from beginning to end. And we've come to, I think, love each other and appreciate each other very much in the process. And then because of Tom's connections, as well as my connections in the process community, we were able to get 68 people to contribute to the book, a total of 73 individual submissions, and have been able to put it together, I think, in a way that is very attractive to people, but provides a huge variety of perspectives from different contexts. So we have contributors from at least a dozen different denominations or traditions. Another thing that I want to highlight about the book is that it's the first place that I've seen that really brings together the process theology community and the open and relational theology community. And I think that's a great value in the book. And I mean, I could say a lot more. If you haven't seen the book, I encourage you to buy it, obviously. And I could show you the table of contents. It has, amazing contributors from about 10 people who are actually theologians, but also preach regularly in congregations, like John Tatamanil, who's actually a deacon in his local Anglican congregation in Victoria, Canada, as well as teaching at Union Theological Seminary, but also just a large number of local church pastors, some of whom are very new to this, and others of whom have been doing this for decades. Like Paul Nancaro, who's with us on the Zoom tonight, and as we were putting this together, I also came to the conclusion that the timing was really good for this, because in 2022, just a couple years before our book came out, Paul and John Cobb and Bruce Epperly had produced a revised edition of their book, The Call of the Spirit, which is a tremendous resource for local churches as well, from the process theology perspective. And then that same year, Ron Allen put out his book called You Never Preach from the Same Pulpit Twice, preaching from the perspective of process theology. And it just feels like, to me, like there's a significant, for lack of a better term, a significant movement right now in this direction. So I've been telling people that I'm an evangelist for open relational and process theology. I know that evangelism is sometimes considered to be a not very useful word in progressive communities, but I think that there isn't a better word for it, and that we need to spread the good news of open relational and process theology in all of the ways that we can. So I hope that any of you who are joining tonight who haven't seen the book will get it and read it, but also tell everybody who you know about it, and try to help spread that good news, because I think that we're doing this is all from almost all of the contributors are coming from the perspective of serving in Christian congregations or in Christian settings, except for a couple. Kat Reeves is one of the exceptions. She's an interfaith minister and chaplain, and she wrote a beautiful essay about using these ideas in hospice and chaplaincy work, as did Tracy Tucker. I think I'll just stop there, and we can have more conversation during the question and answer, but I want to give Nichole and Vikki an opportunity to talk about their own experience of being part of this team and what this book has meant to them. So Vikki, do you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah, it was an unexpected delight to be invited into this project, and has been such a privilege. I've grown from reading all of the chapters that I edited, and our conversation, and just the breadth of the conversation, how diverse the number of the types of people, the background and the perspective of all those who have been a part of it. So it's been a growing experience for me. But it's also been an opportunity, and what I think is unique about this book is it really helps move the conversation out of sort of these academic, I call them theo-nerd, conversations, to really going into congregations and into lay people in the congregations. I've had so many conversations just with the churches that I'm connected with, the lay people that I'm connected with, that this is very, very new ideas for them, and yet answering the questions that they're asking the questions that are really challenging their faith, really challenging their experience of God. So it's really speaking to a deep felt need in the church. What's wonderful about the book, I think, is that it does give those tools to working preachers like me in everyday congregations, gives you the tools to begin to explore these topics in very accessible ways that will reach average lay people and really, really help speak to them in a deep way. I think because open and relational theology and process theology really helps to make sense of our faith. It helps us to connect our experience of the world, our experience of God, with sort of our mental framework. It really has a revitalizing effect on our faith. And, I think Jeff spoke well to that when he spoke about his own experience there. And I think all of us and all of the 68 authors who were part of this project are people that have been profoundly moved by that, have had that awakening of our faith that comes when our experience of the world matches our mental framework and enlivens things for us. So it just has been, I think, a remarkable experience to be a part of it. I'm very proud of the work that we did, and my co-editors and our wonderful contributors, and hope that it is one that is used by working preachers, working pastors, chaplains, broadly. Nichole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nichole Torbitzky. I am a professor of religion at Lindenwood University here in St. Charles, Missouri, and also the university chaplain. And also, as Sherry said earlier, I get to be the editor for the Process of Faith lectionary commentary series. And so I'm grateful to see so many of you that I worked with on this book, and then that I also work with regularly with the lectionary commentaries. What a pleasure it is to be with you today, and what a pleasure it's been to work on this book. And Jeff tells it well. Like, I just got an email out of the blue one day from Tom Oord, who I had only met in passing before. I was like, hey, you have some editing skills. You want to come on board? All right, yeah, sure, fine. It'll be fun. And it was. What it was so heartening to know. I feel really isolated out here in Missouri, where it's really, really there's not a lot of influence of process theology around where I am. And so it feels a little isolating. And to start working with all of these authors was really helpful to know that I'm not alone out there, that here are other voices that are working in congregations and working pastorally around not just the United States, but around the world. I think some of my authors that I got to work with, one was from South Africa. I had one from England. I had one from the Czech Republic. I think I had one from Germany. The fact that they could write process theology in English and it's not their native language was remarkable. Well, I mean, South Africa and England, but the German author and the Czech author, they were amazing with what they did and how they did it in English. It was a really heartening experience. I'm so grateful to be part of this team.
I just wanted to add something that I found really moving in one of the endorsements that we got, if I can find that again. This was from Brian McLaren, who wrote, "More and more of us are coming to the conclusion that many people are leaving church because they see deep and significant problems in what most Christians believe and preach. This book could help tens of thousands of churches and pastors imagine a better way forward. It includes real-life sermons from the fresh and needed perspective of open, relational, and process theology. Enthusiastically recommended." Now, everybody knows Brian McLaren, and I think he doesn't say things like that lightly. But I think that, and he knows the situation of Christian churches in the United States as well as anybody. So for him to say that, I take that very seriously. And I want to encourage us to imagine what that could be like. that tens of thousands of Christian congregations in the US would be doing this, what an impact that could have on the whole landscape of religion and politics and social justice and let alone people's understanding of God and the question of evil and suffering and all that entails. So I just want to encourage everybody again to join me in being an evangelist for the good news that this book is bringing. The good news of the uncontrolling love of God, maybe is the best way to put it. So I want to ask if it would be okay, Sherry, could we invite the contributors to the book who are on, including yourself, to just say something about your own contribution?
Yeah, sure. I can start, and then you might have to. I know you said Paul is a contributor, but you might have to
Yep.
identify who all
Yep.
else is here because I'm not. I don't have the list in my mind.
Yep, I do.
Great, great. Yeah, but I'll just say so what I've been over the years writing I'm a singer and songwriter, guitarist and composer, and so especially while I was getting my doctorate at Claremont, wrote some process hymns. And I've always thought that what people sing is often more powerful in terms of their theology than what they hear preached or what they say in the spoken parts of the liturgy. So I'd just like to see people singing more theologically beneficial hymns rather than kind of the saved by the blood of the lamb types of hymns, or the Jesus is my girlfriend types of hymns, or Jesus is my boyfriend types of hymns. So anyway, so my essay it was called Retuning Religion to a Process Key, and it talks about these two primary hymns that I wrote and kind of the background of why I wrote them and what they were based on. So I'm happy to contribute. I know there's a section that's other things other than sermons, although I've been now doing sermons since my switch to serving as an interim minister since October. But it's nice to see these other pieces as well that are around liturgy and worship and things like that. So I was very happy to be part of the project.
Yep.
So yeah, Jeff, if you want to go ahead and
Sure.
call forth other folks.
Sure. Nichole or Vikki, did you want to say something about the things that you submitted?
Vikki, you want to go first?
And I'm trying to think, just, again, that it was just a delightful experience. I contributed both a sermon and got some lovely feedback this morning on that. And then an essay on what it's like to preach and teach open and relational theology in a Reformed church. As a Presbyterian minister, it has some unique challenges. Yeah, it's just lovely to be a voice in the room with that. Yeah.
And for me, I worked at the end of Mark and on an Easter themed sermon. And that's where my area of interest has always been since I did my work at Claremont. So I got to show everyone how I try to preach that to a group of people who are completely unfamiliar with any of these concepts, right? Like I preached this sermon at Easter time to my undergraduates here who, most of them are just new to Christianity or just coming into their adulthood in Christianity, and to try to talk to them about initial aims and and some of the more processy stuff doesn't work very well, but to talk about how God's story continues in Jesus and how Mark points that out is well received by a lot of my students. And it was great to be able to put it in this book.
Kat Reeves, I've already mentioned your contribution, but could you say a little more about what was in it?
Yeah, so I'm a chaplain, And in chaplaincy, I started in hospice chaplaincy, and so I see a lot of death and dying. And what I recognize is that people believe in doctors the way that they believe in God, that the doctor can do anything. The doctor, if I just go to the emergency room, I'm gonna make it. The doctor can save me. And thinking about Tom Oord's book, God Can't, that's where I was inspired to write about doctors can't, and that death is a natural part of life, birth and death, and that they are, they're holy, and to try to look at death in a different way, and to make that time, instead of those last days struggling and fighting in an emergency room and in a hospital, to make them a time of quality time with family. And I told a story about my uncle who he had cancer and he was dying, and the doctor, maybe believing he was a god, didn't tell him that. And my uncle ended up having surgeries for a port for chemotherapy that he would never have. And so, but this is the story of so many people, you know, just different diagnosis, different procedure. And it's the thing that I would see is we would get somebody on hospice and rush to get them home so they could die at home.
Yep. Thank you. Tim Bowman.
Yes, hello. A few years ago, I took a course in preaching without notes, and I've attempted to stay in practice by doing so about once a month. And so my essay was kind of a meditation on how that experience really highlights the relational aspect of preaching. Preaching without notes is even more so an encounter between the preacher and the congregation and God in the text. And so, yeah, it was a meditation on that experience and encouraging folks to give it a shot.
And I think I got to edit. Didn't I edit?
Yes.
It's nice to see you in person.
Likewise. Thank you.
Paul Nancaro.
Yeah, thank you. I contributed an essay that was really, it's not a sermon, but an essay on bringing a process awareness to several practices of ministry. I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I've been a priest for about 38 years. And one of the things I've noticed over and over again is that a real living religion, a real living faith for people is at least as much about practice as it is about what they say they believe. And so often our prayer, our liturgy, our practice is our primary speech about God, and our theology is secondary speech, reflection based on what it is we do. And for me, the process approach is such a key way of understanding what we do when we pray and when we do liturgy and when we preach. And so in my essay, it was really about opening up an idea of co-creativity and how divine creativity and human creativity come together to make things happen in the world, and how that would inform, say, praying with a parishioner, or preparing a sermon about creation theology, or organizing a congregation to be involved in some sort of social action in the neighborhood. So rather than present a sort of finished sermon piece, this was more of a reflection on how we think about how it is we co-create with God so that we can be set free to practice the open and relation and process life, as well as talk about it.
Thank you so much. And I contributed 2 sermons that I preached at the Church of the Village. One was called Striving for Goodness and Missing the Mark, which is a reflection on a process theological perspective on sin. And the other one was called Does God Have a Plan? In which I basically said, no, not a plan in the way that people usually think about it. Not a predetermined set plan for each of our lives or for the universe as a whole. And as we believe God doesn't know the future and doesn't determine the future, but it's co-created between God and every element of the universe, and certainly by God in relationship with human beings in a very deep way, moment to moment. So Sherry, you want to take over and
Sure.
let's
Sure.
have some lively Q&A.
Yeah, before we open to verbalized questions, I'll just mention that Jace put a question in the chat and Vikki did respond, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. So Jace has asked, would this be something that could be used in an adult Sunday school class to educate, or is it just for sermon studying? So why don't you just share a little bit about that?
So I'll say that there are actually 3 sections in the book. One is sermons. The second section is essays on not just preaching, but on worship, on putting these ideas into practice in many ways. And then there's a smaller section at the end of actual worship elements, music, prayers, things like that. So it absolutely could be used in a class setting in a local congregation. And there's even an essay on how to do that, how to bring these ideas into a class situation by Deanna Young, who's a pastor in a Methodist church in Texas. So yes, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in doing that. So I'll put my email address in the chat in a few minutes, and Jace or anybody else can just contact me directly.
Not only would it be good for an adult book study or an adult class, and for preachers, I think, if you're looking for ideas or ways the ways that other people have used process ideas in sermons, I think it would also work as a really nice devotional. The sermons, like some of them are pretty long, but most of them are not, just a couple of pages. I mean, if you've got that, if part of your practice is I sit down and read every morning and try to reflect, this would be a wonderful devotional.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in an adult class, one sermon could be read and reflected on within the class, just in terms of how it, what it brings up for people and how they want to think about it and the ideas in terms of their own spiritual journeys. So yeah. Very good. Okay, well let's.
We have a couple of contributions to the book that actually talk about the personal experience of the writer of their evolution into process or open and relational theology. So Russ Dean, who's a Baptist minister in North Carolina, actually titled his essay, "I Invented Process Theology." And he basically says, I was preaching a lot of these ideas before I even realized that they were aligned with process theology.
He was process before process was cool,
That's
huh?
Right.
Process cool.
Yeah, well,
cool? I want to be one of the cool kids. That's cool.
Among us nerdier types, yes. Among us zestier thinkers.
I like that. Zesty, yes.
As Trip Fuller might say, our zestiness. Yeah, okay, so let's why don't we open it up to questions now.